everyone, my name is Allison and I hope you're having a good day. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to deal with construction catastrophe. I mean, recreating custom woodwork. In our last video, we did this. It was a bit of an odyssey. If you want to check it out, there's a link. However, there was something that I really skipped over both at the original time of construction and in the last video. I'm kind of curious if anyone will have spotted it. Okay, I'll tell you. It was the decorative brackets, and originally I wasn't concerned with them at all because they weren't necessary in making the structure sound and structural again. Originally, the whole plan with them was just remove them, strip them, sand them, paint them, and put them back in. Really boring. Until disaster struck. Mary Beth contacted me. She had gone outside in the morning and realized that several things were missing from her yard. We dropped by to do an inventory and realized that the majority of 6 of the 7 brackets we had removed were missing. We took our time, we spoke with neighbors, and eventually got a description of a woman and her vehicle who had made off from the property. We filed a police report, and they let us know that several other properties in the area had had construction materials stolen from them in the last 24 hours. At that point, there was nothing to do but sit and wait. It took me several weeks of contacting local antique stores and searching every online retailer I could think of to accept that I would never see them again. Once I came to this conclusion, it really became a matter of when and not what we would need to do. I decided that if I couldn't have the originals, the next best thing would be my own recreation. So my mom and I headed to the local lumber yard and we ended up getting a 2-inch by 12-inch by 12-foot section of red oak rough cut lumber. We had the guys at the lumber yard cut our piece in half to ease transportation, and then we brought that bad boy home. What the plan is I need to make 3 blocks that are a minimum 20 by 22, and then I can get 2 of these out of each block. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by cutting these into thirds and then trimming these like really rough bits off and see if I can get a straight line and a good enough joint between 2 panels to glue them together. And if they're lining up nice, I'll glue them and I'll just do a lot of sanding. And if they're not lining up nice, then I will reevaluate and possibly use a planer. But I don't have one. And I don't know anyone who has one. Or at least I don't know of anyone that I know that has one, so. I did just that. I had a bit of trouble at first because my blade was a touch too short to cut through the full piece in one motion. So I had to cut, flip the wood, and cut again. This made it difficult to cut a totally uniform surface. I switched over to a circular saw with a larger blade and used a guide with it, which much improved my results. I think that the best tool for this job would have been a table saw, but I didn't have one, and even though I do now, I'm scared of it because it's old and doesn't have a lot of safety features that are standard in today's saws. So I just continued with my circular saw and guide, and I did end up with pretty flush, nice cuts in the end. So I finished my first 2 lengthwise cuts. The thing that I need to check for is how these 2 guys go together. So ideally, when I push them together, there should be no gap. Obviously, there is some. It's very little, and most of that is darkness is graphite. But there's like just the tiniest little height difference here, which I think is adding to it as well. But I want to make sure that gap goes away. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to make these cuts, these ones on the edge, because there's bad material that has to come off anyway. So I think I'm going to do that on both other sides of these guys and on the rest of the wood over there. And then I'm going to line them all up and see which ones fit best together. And if I can get ones that fit super well together, then I think will be good. And then the idea is that I'll lay these bracket patterns out once they're glued, and I can do 2 per piece. And that's how we'll make our brackets. I ended up getting some good results with this method, even though making quality cuts was real slow comparatively. At this point, I had a flush joint between the panels where they were going to meet up. However, the top and bottom surfaces weren't as nice. I was trying to figure out if I could get away with a mere sanding. However, Mary Beth, my fairy best, blessed me with this trebuchet, which is pronounced plainer in the US, and I think everywhere else where English is spoken. Okay, it's not really, but trebuchet just sounds ancient and theatrical. Does it justify it if I was legitimately concerned that it would launch projectiles at me? Because I was. So, I just spent the last hour buying materials and then building this. Boom. Because I'm having a problem with my planer where I'm getting too much of these like splinter removed wood chip bits, and they're starting to nick what I'm trying to plane and then adding little divots to the surface. So I built this and it seems to be working. Like when I turn this on, this whole thing like displaces down because of the suction, which I think is good. But it also cracks me up because it reminds me of those like engineering memes. I remember my college days where everything is just held together by duct tape. Once an engineer, always an engineer. Once an engineering student, always an engineering student. Creating this dust collector improved our situation, though by no means was perfect. You can tell I was pleased with the results because I filmed myself doing this. Oh yeah. And yes, I actually filmed it in slow-mo. By accident, of course. We planed our pieces down to the exact thickness of the original bracket. The wood we bought was thicker than it needed to be because I didn't know anything about rough cut lumber before this process. It would have been faster to get a slightly thinner piece, but live some, learn some. On the bright side, the planer was a dream to use once I stopped being scared of it. I would like to say that I was only afraid of it because my boss told me how that if you use this type of tool wrong, it can basically turn into a missile launcher. It can, don't Google it, or do, whatever, I can't stop you. It made me super scared to turn the machine on though. If you use it right, you'll be fine. Watch some safety videos. Perfect advice for any tool. We also planed these wood pieces in sets. We did 2 in the first set and 4 in the second because it required fewer adjustments and therefore was more efficient and exacting. Once the wood was sized, cut, and planed, it was time to assemble the wood blocks. The brackets are approximately 22 inches by 22 inches, and I knew I would need to get 2 brackets from each block, so I glued 2 12-inch by 24-inch sections of wood together to create 1 block. These are the materials I used. To create a block, I dry fit the pieces together, cleaned the joining side with a tack cloth, applied wood glue evenly, and clamped the wood together to make sure full contact was achieved. I did go back through and clean up the excess glue before it cured. You can do this at any part of the curing process, but since I found a good system for holding the pieces together that didn't seem compromised by cleaning, I did it while the glue was still wet because I just find it to be easiest. In case you're wondering, the bond formed by the glue is actually super strong, stronger than the wood even. A guy on YouTube told me, so it has to be true. To make sure, I tested this theory by attempting to cut the bracket out of the 3rd block as the glue set. It had been sitting for 12 plus hours and I thought I could get away with it. When I went to do my first cut, I put pressure on the block and my hand went through it. It didn't fail at the glue line though. It failed maybe 1/8 of an inch to the side of it. That's not really helpful information, but I did confirm that guy's statement. Once I located my patients and allowed it to be exercised, it was time to remove the clamps and trace the pattern. I cut away any edges that were not straight to form a rectangular box that I could use the 90-degree angles of to match that 90-degree angle on the bracket. I then laid the bracket down, clamped it into place, and traced its shape. I decided to darken the line once I pulled the bracket back so that it would be as visible as possible when I cut it out. I did this twice, and then it was time for, dun dun, the jigsaw. I've drawn out my pattern. The parts I'm most worried about cutting out are these two inner pieces, just because they're so small, just even compared to the blade that I have to cut them with. So I can't use a bandsaw on them because I have no way of getting the blade in there, so I'm just gonna have to drill out a hole and then really take my time with this. I guess I could use this smaller blade too, but I think it's just gonna be difficult to cut out. So my solution for right now is to ignore it, and I'm gonna try cutting out this bottom section just to see how it'll work and to feel like I've accomplished something. Ignore your problems. Future me will deal. I elected to use my jigsaw because it was the only saw I had that could possibly be used to cut out this type of design. You could also use a band or a scroll saw, in which case your blade probably wouldn't experience as much of the bending and inconsistency that mine did, but you work with what you got. Well, I tried it. I'm really happy with the first cut I started to make, and then with this curve, I think it's gonna work well. The issue that I'm having, and that you can see a little bit here, is that as soon as I start to turn with the blade, when I'm turning into that curve, it is smoking. And I don't want to set anything on fire right now. Well, I've never had this happen before. That probably shows how much of a novice woodworker I am. I had nothing to do but get on with it, so get going and gone I did. I had issues with the blade bending because the wood was so thick and it was only attached to the saw along one side of the wood. This made it pretty much impossible to control my cuts well where the curves were tight. Also, it was just hard on my hands. So here's the first one I made. It turned out okay. I'm happy with like all of these edges. I think they look pretty good. Parts I'm unhappy with? Oh yeah. You can see the issue. This one turned out better, but this one in particular was just super difficult. It's like that on both sides. Good thing wood putty exists. Ooh, also, now that I've done the first one, I have some better ideas on how to make the internal cuts easier, cleaner, how to get them to turn out nicer, and some of the outside cuts because I've done it once now. My ideas for improvement really focused on approaching curves in a way that formed more line segments but straighter lines. There was benefit, but not as much as I would have hoped, and it didn't really change the fact that a jigsaw probably wasn't the best saw for this particular job. Fortunately, I showed my Uncle Mark what I was doing, and he told me to stop. He had a saw for me, and since I was going to help lay a patio at my cousin's house that weekend, he would give it to me. I had no plans to actually stop because I was having fun and didn't want to halt progress, but then my Uncle Rob asked what I was up to, and I explained, and he told me to wait. Come on, be patient. That a scroll saw was the perfect tool for the job, and I'd be so much better off. I can ignore advice from one solid source, but once they start stacking up against me, I had to relent. So I cut this one out with my brand new saw, and it's not perfect, like there, but for the most part, it's so clean. It's not catching on fire anymore. Look at the lack of scorch marks comparatively. And also the difference between like this, look at those two, look at all those little places that I screwed up compared to these guys, front and back. These guys look great. The cuts came out so much nicer because the saw is fixed at both the top and the bottom, which kept it cutting through the wood at a right angle instead of an inconsistent diagonal one. Since these blocks of wood were big, I started off by reducing the size that I was working with via jigsaw. This made it lighter and less cumbersome, though the bracket size was just big enough not to be able to swing fully through my squirrel saw. Nonetheless, I moved over to my squirrel saw. Honestly, I love this saw. It is so easy to use. You place the wood on the surface and move it around slowly based on the pattern. Caused no muscle strain, only satisfaction. The cuts came out nice. Ooh, I did it! Mom and I prepared the wood with the light sanding and tacking to remove the dust. I also tidied up the garage at this bit. I never do that stuff enough while working. But back to the wood. Honestly, this wood was the nicest stuff I'd ever worked with, and it was so easy to prep, especially when machines and Mom did most of that process.
Hola.
The brackets are ready for paint. The issue I'm having now is that I just think they're so pretty, I kind of don't want to paint them. The thing is that it's historically appropriate. So, yeah. Here we go.
And she's always appropriate.
On this I will be. When it came to painting, we did a coat of white and 2 coats of pink. Both paints were 2-in-1 paint and primers. Mary Beth, who was the homeowner, picked the paint colors for the entire porch and also selected which color would be used for the brackets. I was quite happy with her selection. We had a palette of white, pink, red, and blue to choose from. The Victorians liked to use architecture to show off wealth, time, influence, and paint was a way of highlighting craftsmanship or craftspersonship. Yeah. And draw the eye to the expensive details that they had put a lot of money and effort into. Personally, I thought white would be boring and wouldn't stand out much from the majority white columns. I also thought the red would be too dark. A common practice in Victorian architecture was to apply darker paint colors lower and lighter paint colors higher to reinforce the idea of structure via color. Blue could have been used, but since it wasn't used heavily throughout the rest of the structure, I feel like it could have felt a little detached from the rest of the design, so I was tickled pink when she chose that color. Oh, I also painted the original bracket white for the neighbor's side of the center post. Side note, she was super chill about this entire process and so kind when our brackets got stolen. She literally offered us hers. What an angel. Obviously, I didn't take her up on this offer because I didn't want to do anything that would distract from the historic quality of the home that already existed, but so sweet. We painted the brackets prior to install because it's the easiest way to get clean lines when you're installing new pieces. I thought installation would be super easy. 2 screws, wham bam, thanks very much, what's next, ma'am? Not so. I didn't use my head and I forgot that I could clamp them. So we did this awkward little dance until I remembered that they're a thing I own. I also didn't pre-drill, which was terrible because we were working with hardwood. So I basically exhausted myself stripping screws in various precarious positions. Eventually, I located my brain, addressed those issues, and had my dad take over, which was much appreciated. It worked out in the end, but I did make it so much harder than it needed to be.
But we're hearing a lot of that it's not perfect here, aren't we?
Nothing is ever perfect.
Speak for yourself.
We applied putty in all of the screw holes, sanded lightly, and did some touch-up painting. And ba-boom! Results! So it really did all end well. Let me know if you like this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye!